Hey YouTube, Alex here, and in today's video I want to answer the question, how will I pay for this? And in relation to this question, a lot of people have asked me, Alex, how do you pay for travel? How are you going to pay for travel? How do you manage the cost of travel? And I really want to just answer that first question. How do I pay for this? How do I plan to pay for this? So the first and most obvious thing that I can mention here as far as paying for travel is that I will be working. So I'm a bit over halfway through a computer science degree. I'm currently handling different kinds of applications for different internships and job opportunities. And my main goal is to find remote work, a position where I can work for American wages, but do so in a remote fashion where I'm not necessarily bound to the American cost of living. There's some fairly high costs associated with living in America that you can't really get around: housing, food, transportation, and I hope to mediate those with travel to other countries. So that's the first thing you should really be thinking about if you're thinking about living abroad, is how you're going to pay for it, because a lot of people want to do this, they want to pursue this lifestyle, but they haven't really fully fleshed out a plan to pay for it. And so for me, that really comes down to trying to work my way into a remote career. Of course, it's not necessarily be easy starting out, but even now I have friends that work remote within the US. They really enjoy the arrangement. I've been able to get kind of tips and hints and tricks from them that I can use to be more effective when I try to do this. And it's something that's worth considering for you, is if the career that you're involved in doesn't allow for that, or perhaps you're not in the section of that field that allows for that, maybe you pursue a certain area of the field, or get skills or certifications or training to do something that can be done more remotely. That's something to think about. Is maybe you feel like, well, my job can't be done remote. Well, maybe there's something that you can do to change it up, mix it up, that will allow for that. Next thing I'm going to mention here is investment. So for me, I like to live relatively frugally. I wouldn't say I live as cheap as some others, but probably live cheaper than many people. And by kind of living frugally, I am allowed the luxury of using my extra funds for investing purposes, whether it be stocks. I don't have any real estate, but I might get involved in that down the line when I have a little bit more money to work with, as real estate can be quite capital intensive. But it's certainly worth thinking about if if you don't have a really luxurious lifestyle, then you're already part of the way there as far as living abroad, because you're not going to be giving up as much to have the extra sort of resources that act as a sort of security feature when you are living in these other countries. It's really nice for me to know that if I run into an emergency, some of my assets are quite liquid to where I can just liquidate them and pay for whatever I need to pay for. This would be quite different if I was living paycheck to paycheck, where if I didn't have a paycheck to pay for things, I'd be SOL. Before I go further, I do want to be clear, this is not financial advice. I'm not saying any of these things to try to sell you on something or have any kind of scheme or whatever, but I do want to kind of be a little bit more transparent about what I do, because I think it's really relevant as far as not just dreaming about some of these lifestyle choices, but really being able to execute on some of these plans and enjoy some of these other places. And you may have your own ideas as far as planning, but definitely plan ahead for additional costs. I made the video before, bring twice the money, half the stuff. I really still believe that, and I'll probably believe that forever, that you're not going to regret saving more money, coming with more money. One of my subscribers mentioned that in the video I did last week, where they mentioned, it never hurts to bring more money when you are looking at coming to Thailand, for example, because some costs are underestimated. Sometimes you get surprise costs. There's really a lot to think about when it comes to long-term planning, because I think some of you may be used to planning a vacation where you're like, I'll just be there for a week, and there probably shouldn't be that many surprises in a span of a week. But when you're talking about longer time frames, things can really add up and costs can come out of nowhere. Maybe you need some kind of health treatment or dental treatment. Maybe you have some kind of issue that can't be handled locally, so you need to go to the capital city of the country or region you're in. You have to pay for hotels, you have to pay for transportation. All these things can come up, and it's much better to be anticipating some of these hidden costs, and all of a sudden at the last minute you're surprised with what you're going to have to spend money on. Another secret, I don't know if you want to call it a secret or a hidden thing, but I don't have children. So some of you may have children. That's certainly an added cost that you have to account for. For me, that's not an issue. Additionally, I'm not married. I'm not divorced either. I'm single. And so I don't really have costs associated with a partner. If I'm paying for things, I'm not paying for two people. I'm most of the time paying for just one person. When it comes to paying for these things as well, you got to understand, I may not be paying for the same standard that you're expecting. So some viewers may expect to travel in luxury. They may expect to stay in luxury accommodation. They may expect to be eating really nice food, expensive imported food. But for me, I often opt for the more modest transportation. If public transit is safe, I'll often offer public transportation over private transportation unless it's a time-sensitive thing. So I definitely use public transportation at my expense when it caused me to miss a flight. So I'm not going to suggest to you that if you're dealing with a short-on-time situation to still opt for the more economical option. It could turn out to be not economical, because in that case I had to pay for a whole nother plane ticket, and it was like last minute, so the flight was more expensive than it would be. This was in Singapore, and it wasn't a super emergency for me, but it was something I had to pay extra for that I didn't think about at the start of the trip. So keep in mind also with budget accommodation that you may not be in the hottest part of the city. So for me, when it comes to not being in the hottest part of the city, I'm also often then saving money on food because I'm not surrounded by as many Western restaurants. I'm more often surrounded by local restaurants, so they charge a lower price. So not only am I saving on my accommodation, but I'm also saving on my food costs. This can make transit a bit more pricey. If I have to go back and forth to the city center for various meetings or filming, then often I am going to spend a little bit more on transit, but I feel like it's made up for the fact that I'll be spending less on food and less on accommodation. The next thing that I'll mention here when it comes to how do I pay for this, you'll notice that I tend to spend longer periods of time in countries. So some of you who may have more of experience when it comes to vacation, short-term vacations, traveling for like a week or so, you can afford to splurge because you're only doing it for 7 days, or you're only doing it for 5 days, or you're only doing it for a weekend. But for me, having just spent several months in Colombia, several months in Peru, I can't afford $100 a night hotel every night for 6 months. I mean, we're talking at that point like $18,000. And so you have to kind of shift your mindset when you think about how do I pay for this stuff. Don't approach it like you would a short-term vacation. You've got to approach it more like somewhere halfway between a local and an expat. You've got to approach it somewhere like halfway between what a local would live like and a vacationer would live like. You don't want to give up all of your luxuries. Like obviously you're probably going to want data, a reliable cell phone plan. You're going to want some Western food on occasion. You'll want to live in perhaps a somewhat modern apartment. But at the same time, you're not going to necessarily want to be in a luxury boutique hotel. You're not going to necessarily want to be eating filet mignon every night or sushi every night. You're not going to necessarily want to rent you're not necessarily want to hire a really expensive driver. He's driving a nice car. He's dressed in a suit. That's just going to be too much and not really practical, and also you're going to stick out really bad if you do that kind of thing consistently in one place. People are going to start to perhaps target you for crime. Whereas on the other hand, of course I mentioned before, we don't want to give up all of our creature comforts. We don't want live as though we were living in abject poverty in some cases. There's no real point in that. If you are from a Western developed country, there's no reason for you to go try to live in another country on $200 or $300 a month. It just is impractical, and it will be a burden on that society in some way or another that we may not anticipate, but ends up being the case because that's just how that sort of situation goes down. I know some people, they are impatient, they want to go abroad and live abroad now, but really a lot of people would be better off if they just prepared more financially and did more planning. That's the next thing I'm going to mention when it comes to how to, you pay for this kind of thing. You really need to plan a lot, and don't underestimate your planning. I talk to some people like, well, it's going to be another year before I get to go over there. I'm like, don't feel bad at all about that. You should not feel ashamed that you're not traveling right now just because I'm traveling right now. I certainly don't look down on people that, oh, you're not traveling right now, or you don't have a plane ticket to fly out next week, then you're not a real traveler. I don't have that attitude at all. I feel like, in fact, the reverse. The more planning you put into it, the more research you do, it actually can be better. And some say, oh, well, some people stay stuck in research mode forever, planning mode forever. I'm not talking about that, but I'd also say if you put a little bit more time into planning, you put more time into understanding yourself and what you like, what your preferences are, whether you like the beach, the mountains, city, rural, whatever it is that you like, Europe, Asia, South America, whatever you want to go for, that you have a better idea of that, because you don't want to go to the wrong region or set up visits to a set of countries you're probably not going to like and then think, oh, well, expat life isn't for me. I tried Costa Rica and I didn't like Costa Rica. This is hypothetical. I haven't been to Costa Rica, but I tried Costa Rica. I didn't like it, so I'm not going to do this anymore. I'm just going to go back to America and not pursue this anymore. Whereas maybe if you had visited, just for the sake of discussion, Chile, or Argentina. Argentina is much more economical, so it'd probably more likely be Argentina, but that you find, oh, this is really nice, and there's certain things I can do here that I couldn't do in Costa Rica that make this whole experience a lot better. Also, picking places that don't just strike your fancy on vacation. I think some people feel like if they like a certain place on vacation, they'd like to live there, and that's not the case. There's several places I really enjoy visiting in the United States, for example, that I don't necessarily want to live there. Florida is a good example. Really enjoy visiting Florida on vacation. It's a beautiful state. You've got a lot of wonderful beaches, seafood, different kinds of snorkeling opportunities, diving opportunities. But for me, there's a high cost of living in Florida. It's quite busy. It feels very busy because you have people coming in and out all the time for vacation. The hot weather for me gets to be a little bit too much in the summer especially. So think about these factors when you're thinking about some places you go to, because if you've saved up a certain amount of money and you really kind of need to get it right, or at least somewhat right, you don't want to spend that money getting it wrong for a long period of time, then you're out of money and you still want to travel, but you've spent it on a place you don't really care for, you don't really love, and perhaps you've made friends or connections in that area. That's not going to be a big use to you because you're not going to go back. There's places I've been where I'm like, I wish I hadn't wasted the money and time to come up here, because I didn't meet anyone, I didn't really do anything too exciting, and I'm poorer for the experience. So yeah, that kind of ties into the next thing. Just be patient. If it's going to take you 5 years to execute on a plan, so be it. For me, I knew I wanted to work remotely 3 years ago, so I've been working for the last 3 years on programming because I knew I really liked my visit to Thailand, but Thailand is not sustainable without regular income, without savings, without a plan. And so that's kind of what I started working on several years ago. So some of you may think, oh, I just started traveling on a whim, but really it's taken a lot of planning. I've also worked in the last 3 years in the United States, doing various jobs, contractor work, like independent contractor work, not construction related. Also in the information technology field. That's kind of been the path that I'm going with more now. but it's taken a lot of patience, and not rushing into this is going to improve your shot at success, because I think that a lot of the expat failure stories you hear about, not all, but I'd say a good chunk, are because people rushed into it. They didn't plan enough, they didn't have enough finances in order, they didn't have their mindset kind of adjusted, they weren't ready for a different language. Perhaps you're going somewhere or want to go somewhere that has a different language. They didn't brush up on that language. Perhaps they didn't realize that the weather would be the way it is. These are just kind of random things that I'm throwing out there, but some of these things that would be things that people knew about if they did more research. Some of these things are more easily avoidable than other things. As an example, cost of living, that's a big one. How do I afford this? Well, I anticipate that my cost of living is going to go up because inflation is higher in many of these countries than it is in the US, and that I'll have to spend more for the same things over time. So the prices I'm paying today are not going to be the prices I'm paying in 5 to 10 years. Not just for rent, but also for food and for transportation. And coming with that, if you ask me the question, how do I afford this? I'm willing to lower my standard of living. I talked about it a bit before, but I'm not somebody who's going out and renting a nice car, buying a car in these countries. I'm not somebody who has to stay in a penthouse suite apartment. I'm not somebody that has to eat really fine meals every night, and these kinds of things make it more sustainable, because for me it's all about the experience, and I don't have to have the top of the top experience, the most expensive experience, to still have a good experience in a lot of these places. I can have a wonderful time, and I'm often having a better experience than a lot of the local people, because a lot of them are perhaps struggling financially. They don't have the ability to make money in the United States. So if you don't just compare yourself to the high-end luxury travelers, but you also compare yourself to some local people who can't travel, it's just not within their means, different situations like that, then you do feel some gratitude. You do feel a sense of like, wow, I'm glad that you feel like, oh, well, I'm glad that I come from a situation where I can have disposable income and savings and investments that will allow me to enjoy many of these really unique experiences. So anyway, I hope this video has been helpful. I wanted to answer the question, how do I pay for this? I mentioned that I've worked in IT. I mentioned that I have some investments. I mentioned that I try to live below my means, that I try not to go overboard, especially when I'm thinking about the long term. Of course, I'm single, I don't have children, so that's kind of a hidden thing that for some of you, that's just not a way that you're going to be able to get ahead on that aspect of life. But understand that we all have advantages, and some of your advantages may transfer over to pursuing an expat lifestyle. So anyway, I hope this has been helpful. Definitely comment down below, let me know what you think. Give us a thumbs up, it helps with the algorithm, and subscribe to the channel if you haven't already, and I will talk to you soon.